Welcome, Karen. Thank you for being on the show again.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
I'm so excited that we were able to arrange this. I know you're super busy, and today we're going to be talking about a bunch of different topics. Last podcast that we did together was just so packed with information that it was just massive, right? And so like today we're going to be unpacking a little bit, and one of the topics that we decided to talk about is health surrounding digestive system, right? Like how does your microbiome impact your overall health? What the heck is a microbiome? What is SIBO? What is IBS? All that stuff. So let's get right into it.
Okay, well, the
Yeah.
microbiome has become somewhat of a newer word. We have all been talking about kind of the flora and fauna of the digestive system, which is referring to all the good bacteria as well as the sometimes pathogenic or the opportunistic bacteria. But over the years, we've discovered it's really more of an environment. It's not just the bugs that are in there. It is everything that feeds the bacteria and what is truly the balance. Is it okay to have a little bit of candida or a parasite? Is it all one big happy family and it only becomes a problem if something gets out of balance? And I was thinking about this before we started today. A few years ago, we were associated with a community-supported agricultural farm, and they had a really great experience. They had taken over a farm that was right next door to them, and it was just a big old disaster. They were an organic farming farm, and then the one next to them wasn't. So, it took several years to kind of convert that, but in the end, they basically found they had to just leave it alone. It became this big old wild mess. All kinds of insects were coming in and tearing things up, and animals they hadn't seen in a while came in. And eventually, it just slowly equilibrized, or it became very balanced. And it was so fascinating to hear this because that's truly what happens to the body, especially with the digestive system. We're all mostly born with a good digestive system, some better than others, depending on often what the mother was eating, or if unfortunately she had to go through antibiotics, or if it was a natural birth versus cesarean, all kinds of factors. But for the most part, we're born with a good digestion intact. And then over the years, we might have gotten sick or had some diarrhea or had antibiotics or, food poisoning. All kinds of things can happen. And if you treat it with the conventional standard, then it can really throw things out of balance. Some people more than others, and there can be some genetic factors that come into that. But after several decades, when people get really out of balance, at first they might be okay, and then they just over the years realize something's not quite right. And then they come in, and if you could just feed people good food and let them equalize, it really can happen. But it's just fascinating to see, that really is reflective of how the digestive tract works. It can become a big disaster. It becomes a little bit of a war in there. I love doing a digestive test. Really, it's a stool test to see what's happening in the colon, and it measures the good bacteria, the pathogenic bacteria, the opportunistic bacteria, and then all the candidas and the parasites.
What are candidas?
There are actually different species of candida. The main one's Candida albicans. But there can be other species that aren't always as much of a problem, but they can build up over time, and they can sometimes become a problem if they're too out of balance.
Right.
And so if you do have to, in a sense, kill some of these things off, that can be okay as long as you know where you're starting and you know what kind of balance you need to bring back into it.
So how do we balance our microbiome?
Find out what it looks like first. So you have to see if you're working against something. If you are, then there can be some nice herbs that you can use to either knock down those numbers. You don't have to annihilate anything. You might need to be a little bit stronger. I like to use a liquid herbal to do this just because you can control it really well and use a little bit or a lot depending on the situation. But after you knock that down into better balance and you really determine that by symptom, then you bring back in a good probiotic. And sometimes you need to rebuild the mucous membranes of the digestive tract with some nice demulcent herbs, maybe some amino acids. So everything to just calm everything down and rebuild it. And of course, make sure that you don't get into that situation again. So, was it some food poisoning that had bothered you some years ago that now is not going to be a problem? Or Were you eating way too much sugar and you allowed candida to grow? Things like that. So there's more education that comes into after you figure out what the problem actually is.
Right.
And beyond that, getting into SIBO, SIBO is not considered a cause in and of itself.
What is SIBO? What does that stand for?
Oh, right. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Okay.
And so it's a normal state of bacteria in the small intestine specifically, but when it gets out of control, then you have your typical IBS symptoms, some gas, bloat, constipation or diarrhea, abdominal pain, all the things that you go to the doctor for, and they say, oh, you have IBS.
And what is IBS?
You're fine. Irritable bowel syndrome.
Irritable bowel syndrome, okay.
So it's something that people are generally told you have to live with. Sometimes you can change your diet, eat more fiber. Ironically, if you eat more fiber and you feel worse, that's a pretty positive SIBO state. Unfortunately, it sounds weird, but the fiber is what actually feed these bacteria.
Really?
Ironically, it's not sugar. Sugar feeds candida, so it's a whole different problem there. But yeah, if somebody goes on a high fiber diet thinking I'm constipated, I just got to move some of this through, they can feel 100% worse. So in my mind, that's just a very positive SIBO test that you did on yourself, but there's a breath test that we can actually do for that and see if it exists. But even beyond that, after you find out you do have SIBO, you have to try and figure out, well, what got you there in the first place? Because it didn't just happen overnight. It is an effect from something else, usually from something going on in the colon. And the biggest culprits there are long-term constipation and untreated food poisoning if it was something that should have been treated. And that usually happened some years ago, and just suddenly you're developing these problems. And it's not always an easy thing to deal with. It kind of depends on how long it's been hanging out there and the state of your general digestive system as a whole. But there are medicines that you can use for this. There's a pretty standard protocol. There are also herbs that can be used in a specific protocol as well. And I use both, quite honestly. It really just depends on what is suitable to that person and what's going to be most effective.
And what are some of the symptoms of IBS? How people how can they self-diagnose? Like, hey, do I have just an upset stomach and diarrhea, or is it, or are there like some other things that are telltale signs that you have an IBS?
Well, it's going to be more long-term. It's usually that situation where you don't have anything pathological wrong with you, and you go to the doctor complaining of uncomfortable gas or bloat or constipation or diarrhea. Those are the hallmark signs. So they're very general. Just about anything can cause those symptoms.
Right.
But if they've been hanging around for a really long time, and you've been trying to do things like increase your fiber if you're constipated, just to move things through, that can help. Or if you're not moving enough, drinking enough water, if you've done all the standard things that are logical to do and you're not getting any better, and then you fall into this garbage pail term of IBS. It's just that term where we don't know what it is. We're going to call it this, and there you go. So
Right.
that's a really frustrating place for people to be.
How do you know when your gut is balanced? Because there's like so many different dietary or diets, right? Or just modes of, I guess, eating is like where you have, some people are vegetarians, some people are vegan, some people are, I don't know, omnivores, or like, what do they call them? Flexitarians. And then on the other side, you have carnivores where, they eat just meat and eggs and that kind of stuff. So you have such a huge variety of different foods that are hitting the system. So how do you know what does a balanced intestines and that microbiome, look like? What is our point of reference?
Have no gas or bloat. You
Right.
should feel like your food is moving through you easily. Like if you eat something, it should not sit heavy in your stomach.
Right.
You shouldn't really even feel it. You just have a nice sensation that you're eating something, but it's not sitting there.
Right.
You should not be constipated. You basically, believe it or not, our body is set up to have a bowel movement after every meal. So 2 or 3 times a day, you're supposed to have a bowel movement, which is shocking
Really?
to a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, in this day and age, I'm happy if somebody at least has one healthy bowel movement, but it should be after every meal.
Wow.
And I talk to my patients about this all day long. It's very normal to me, but it grosses everybody out. But the perfect poop is soft serve ice cream-esque, light and fluffy. So it just looks, it doesn't have, it's not that hard knobby thing. It's not real dense. It's not too soft. It doesn't fall apart in the bowl. It doesn't float. It just kind of looks like one big long snake. And you should feel a complete evacuation. It should be easy, and it should not take a long period of time. You just kind of sit down, let it happen, and boom, you're done. Also, to get it slightly more gross on you, when you're wiping, there shouldn't be a lot of residue. Okay.
Interesting.
So it's sort of like a non-event. You eat food, you don't really, you feel full, but you don't feel a sensation of heaviness, and it passes out of your body, ideally after you eat. A lot of factors go into that, though: fiber, water, movement, stress, all kinds of things. And you feel good. You have energy. You have a clear focus and concentration. You have a good mood. You have good energy. Food affects all these different things that you aren't always attaching to.
Absolutely. But how, so, let's call in some video reference from National Geographic when you have animals out there in Serengeti and, they just go out and poop, and it's just like, it's so seamless. They're just like, done, I'm on, I'm moving on. Right. And it seems like, you're like, wow, okay, well, that was an interesting event. So I kind of hear what you're saying in terms of that it should be kind of effortless in that sense. But then, given the fact that there's just such a variety of foods that people eat, some people are like so pro fiber, you have to have a lot of fiber. So it's like, just because we don't digest fiber. So it's like easy for for our body to kind of expel. Others are like, well, I'm just eating meat and I feel great. I have high energy. I have all the benefits that they cite that are I'm energetic. I have, everything's great. I'm very regular with my pooping, and so so how do we know? How do we know? Like I guess just like by what you're producing, what you're expelling is like, oh, if it's that, then you're good. But what was our like original point of reference? I'm curious. Like how do we determine that this is good and something else is not good?
That's a good question. So there are so many diets out there. It can be trial and error, but the basic tenets are always going to be plant-based. I mean, our nutrient-dense foods are vegetables. That's sort of the end-all, be-all. Mostly vegetables, which people are calling plant-based. I'm not saying you have to be a vegetarian, but there is some merit to having a lot of vegetables on your plate, and then the protein can come from whatever kind of food makes you feel good. So I don't find that people do well sticking to one kind of diet forever. Right. I have a lot of people who kind of flex through these different diets. There's always a new diet coming out.
I agree.
And it's okay to try them all on for size, 2 weeks on this one or that one, and just see how you feel. I don't think you can just get all your nutrients from one way of eating, because there are raw foods, there are cooked foods, high fiber foods, and you have to listen to your body. If your body isn't responding well to what we consider healthy foods, then there's probably another problem going on. I have some patients with rather severe digestive issues, and if I told them to eat lots of fiber, they wouldn't be able to handle it. Their bellies would feel horrible. So they actually have to eat a lot of white food, and we have to figure out, what are you going to tolerate, and what is the problem? Are you getting enough nutrition? So there are some bridges here if you do fall into that category, but I think it's really logical. We know vegetables are good for us. That will never go away. Water, and the old adage of drink half your body weight in ounces is still going to hold true. And the amount of protein really depends on body size, activity, kidney function for some people. So there are a lot of variables. The basics are always going to be water for the most part, unless again you have congestive heart failure or kidney disease. Some disease states don't always hold true with that. But lots of vegetables, enough water, and adequate protein for you.
I haven't heard that fruit, half of your body, like your body weight in ounces, or was it half?
So a 150-pound person would drink 75 ounces of water a day. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, well, I haven't heard that.
Granted, if you drink caffeine, you have to drink a little bit more, too.
Oh, that's true, because that dehydrates you a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, for every cup of coffee or tea, you should probably drink 2 more cups of water.
Right. So you are speaking my language. I love it, because I what I was trying to tease out of you is oh, this is better than everything else. Like everybody's body is different, and everybody is on their own journey to find what their body really responds well and works well with. And so, because we have these camps, like, people are like, oh, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, I'm a carnivore, I eat only meat, I'm a this and that. And I think that just kind of does a disservice, because we're trying to do one size fits all type of approach, and it really, everybody's body, even though we are all kind of the same genetically speaking, our bodies still kind of react with different things differently. So it's music to my ears that you say that we should just experiment, and we should figure out what our bodies need, and there's like no one specific thing. And then that
and
we
you
should
can also use laboratory to help guide you as well. If you're developing diabetes, then that's something you can track by laboratory as you change your diet and make sure you're going down the right road.
Right. Food is drugs. Food is good. Food is
food is medicine.
Yeah, food is medicine. That's what I wanted to say. Not drugs. Food is medicine. Food is medicine. So, why is we think of our body as sort of like compartments. You got your brain, you got your you got your heart, you got your organs and things, and so why is digestive system so important for our health?
That's where you're getting all of your nutrition. So you eat the right food, and it feeds your body the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, everything that you need to run your body. So we are literally what we eat. If you are only eating fast food, oxidized oils, you're not going to feel good eventually. Eventually, you're going to have a problem. So I know there's always the issue of, well, I know I eat really well, but sometimes I get sick anyway. Well, that comes down to some unique factors to you. But if you're eating the right foods, you have good digestive function, meaning you're breaking it down, you're digesting it, so you have enough hydrochloric acid and enzymes being produced to digest this food, and then you have to actually absorb it. And that can sometimes be a little bit of an issue if you have some digestive problems. And then beyond that, your body could have a hard time transporting certain nutrients into your cells. And that can be boiled down to some genetic factors, actually. If you have a hard time metabolizing your fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, that means you're not going to be able to use those nutrients very efficiently, and therefore you're not going to get the energy or the nutrition associated with it. So it's pretty complicated what our digestive system and our bodies go through to get enough of the right nutrients. But digestion is absolutely where it starts.
How does digestion impact other things that are sort of like seemingly unrelated, like your mood, your hormones? How does that work?
Well, in your mood, you have neurotransmitters that make up your brain chemistry, and those are made from amino acids. So if you're not eating protein, but beyond that, not digesting or absorbing those proteins, your mood probably is not going to be that great, either depression or anxiety or some mix of both. So think of proteins to feed the brain. You can think of all the vitamins and minerals to make that process happen better, because after you break it down into the amino acids, you have to use some minerals and B6 specifically to move down the pathway to actually create the neurotransmitters of serotonin and dopamine that gives you that happy, balanced mood. So if you're not eating enough protein, maybe, some vegetarians, if they're not cognizant of that, they might not be getting enough protein. It could be affecting their mood just simply because of the protein content. That is a real thing. So
can food be partially or in full responsible for some depression in some people?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if it's not what you're eating, specifically, it can be a specific food allergy that can absolutely affect your mood. You need all of these minerals and the vitamins to carry these processes out. So if you're not eating good quality food, you're putting a burden on your body. You're causing more inflammation that can cause some brain inflammation, which will affect your mood. So all of that does matter.
Right. How do you define inflammation?
There are labs that you can do to look to see if you have global inflammation in the body. You can actually look down at the DNA level using a specific test. Often people just come in feeling inflamed, like they might just feel swollen if they try to, squish their fingers. They just don't feel like that's very easy, or you can see it in their face. They look kind of puffy. If their brain is inflamed, then they're not going to have good cognition. They might not have great balance. Not enough to say it's a disease state. It's just they feel off balance in a number of things.
Right.
And so you're going to feel it mostly, I think, in your brain and in your extremities if you're not doing a blood test or a urine test.
And for those who, like, everybody kind of hears about like what inflammation is, but what do you medically speaking, what is inflammation?
Medically speaking, so it's when your immune system is a little bit out of control. So inflammation in a controlled state is actually a good thing. It's your body calling attention to a certain problem. So you bring in these white blood cells to take care of a problem, and then they're supposed to do their thing and then go away. But if the irritant continues, then it becomes a chronic inflammatory state. And so your immune system becomes overactive. You retain more fluid, and that's where you get this swollen feeling because your body's trying to dilute that process or that food allergy in a lot of cases. And so you have to figure out what that irritant is, and that's kind of the hard part because it can be so many different things, whether it's a food or a heavy metal or just not eating the right foods for you, not necessarily a food allergy, just a bad balance, not enough protein versus carbohydrates. So it's a big issue to dive into, and we do see a lot of inflammation, often related to the heavy metals and foods primarily, unless you're actually in a pathological or a disease state.
How do we pay attention to our microbiome? I mean, beyond like, hey, I feel okay, or I feel like something is off. How do we make, and other than labs, is there anything else that people can kind of tap into to understand, like if their microbiome is off? Clearly, obviously, when you take antibiotics after some kind of infection and you are prescribed antibiotics, you know that your microbiome has been kind of decimated, and so you need to kind of you need to rebuild it. But outside of that, on like a day-to-day basis, let's say I don't have any flu symptoms or anything, I feel sort of like okay. What else can I kind of look at to see if my microbiome is doing okay or not?
It's really what we've been talking about. If you're having excessive gas or bloat or constipation or diarrhea, if you needed to take antibiotics, then in our practice, we actually tell people to take probiotics at the same time, at least during the same day. I mean, you take the antibiotics away from the probiotics, but begin taking them at the same time so that you don't cause a disruption of the microbiome. Often that's enough to prevent a problem, but if it's for some reason that didn't happen, you can always follow up after and take a good general probiotic. Eating lots of fiber. Actually, fiber, unless you have a SIBO state or a state where you don't feel good on a lot of fiber, fiber is the substrate or the food that feeds the probiotics. So fiber is actually very key to feeding everything and having a healthy digestive system.
Really? Because I thought that fiber is like not digestible by our body. So you're saying that something still feeds on it?
Yeah, there's soluble and insoluble fibers, so you need both, and they provide the prebiotics to feed the probiotics.
Okay. All right. Okay. And what are some of the good sources of probiotics? I mean, obviously you can go to any kind of store and get a capsule, get a pill that has some kind of bacteria in there. But is there a better way to getting better probiotics?
Well, through food, it's going to be anything cultured. So yogurts, whether that is cow or sheep or goat or coconut, anything fermented is going to be useful. So in yogurts, kefir, even cottage cheese. Yes, kimchi? Absolutely. Kimchi.
Sauerkraut?
Yeah. Kombucha, sauerkraut, chutneys, relish,
right.
A good pickle that hasn't just been sitting in vinegar, but a nice briny pickle. All those things are great for feeding the digestive system. I know a lot of people who have just this little tablespoon amount of sauerkraut with each meal, and that's enough to help things move through.
What are your thoughts on the apple cider vinegar?
Yeah, there's a lot of great research on that, in fact, and a lot of people use it because it does help stimulate your digestive juices, and works. It is an acid, so it's going to work like hydrochloric acid to some extent, not quite as strong.
Right.
But a lot of people take about a teaspoon, about 15 minutes before they eat, and that just gets everything rolling as well. Some people will take a pill that has a little hydrochloric acid, and they kind of do the same thing. But if you want to stick with a good food, apple cider vinegar is great.
Right. To me, it was kind of counterintuitive when some people said like, well, even if you have like indigestion or not even that, like acid reflux, right? Like when you have like that, kick up of your head, like, oh, that's terrible. I need to get Tums or gosh, what's that pink stuff?
Pepto-Bismol.
Pepto, yeah, thank you, Pepto-Bismol, and to kind of quench that acid, right? So you're fighting acid with alkaline magnesium-based solution, right? And then I've heard from someone like, well, no, you should have some apple cider vinegar, and I'm like, well, that makes no sense. I mean, that's acid. That's going to make it even worse. And someone explained to me that. Well, actually, it seems like your body, when it gets more acid, it says like, "Oh, I got too much acid, so let me lower down my acid production," and then in that way, kind of regulate things. And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that's an interesting thing." And I kind of tried. I had it once, and I tried, and I kind of am drinking a little bit of apple cider vinegar, and kind of got used to it, and I like it. And it seems to I don't have acid reflux ever since that, and I'm eating healthy food too. That helps.
Yes, absolutely. And another part of that is if we have low acid in our stomach, then the lower esophageal sphincter, which closes off the esophagus from the throat, is going to stay open. That acid, one of its jobs is to tell that sphincter to actually close so that you don't have acid coming up into the throat. So if your acid goes down, then your body isn't going to close that valve, and whatever acid is in your stomach is going to come up into your throat. So it does sound backwards to actually take acid to improve that, but a lot of people, it does work for them. There are a few people where they try that and they feel like, oh no, I just have too much acid going on. It does not make me feel better. So sometimes you have to go more slowly and just work through it until you can retrain that sphincter to close when it's supposed to.
Right. And diagnostically speaking, and for those who are in DC in your area, they should go and come and visit you, and but in terms of like others who are in also anywhere else, what can be done? How can I find out what's going on in my gut? Can I go to my doctor and say, hey, I want to run these tests. I want to find out what's happening in my gut. What kind of tests would those be?
Regular medical doctors or even gastroenterologists don't run the kind of labs that I do. They're called functional labs. My favorite right now is called GI MAP. It's the stool test that I mentioned, but what makes it different is it doesn't use cultures to identify bacteria or fungi. It's looking at traces of DNA material from those microbes. So even if you had a little bit of an exposure, it's going to show up, and then you quantify, well, is it enough to worry about or not? So you would have to find a doctor who uses that kind of lab. They're usually called integrative doctors or functional doctors, and they can be naturopathic or medical. Usually it means they have, in the medical world, they've taken other courses where they have learned this functional view of medicine, and that's where they learned how to do this stuff. In my training, we're fortunate enough to have it already in our program, so we know how to look at the body from this functional state of view anyway. So you do have to kind of look around. It's not going to be in everybody's tool chest, but usually if they're calling themselves integrative or functional, they should know it.
And in that test, what kind of results does it give you? What kind of markers or what kind of metrics do you get out of that test? And what was the name of it again?
GI MAP by Diagnostic Solutions Laboratory. Yeah.
Diagnostic. Okay.
Yeah, they give this great 4-page result. The first page is all about pathogenic bacteria, stuff you really don't want in your system, like E. coli or Salmonella, the nasty parasites like Giardia. It tells you about all that. The second page goes into more functional issues. It does look at Helicobacter pylori, so that relates to gastroesophageal reflux disease. So if you still have acid problems and you're doing all the right things, you should check for this bacteria and see if that's present. It does increase the older we get. simply because our acid decreases as we get older, unfortunately, and we are liable to have more problems. So it can detect for that, and then you can determine treatment from there. But it also looks at some of the good bacteria. It looks at some different phyla groups to give you an idea of what's going on in there with the good bacteria. There are tens of thousands of bacteria in our bodies. I mean, most of them we don't even have names for yet. So we can't, at least on this kind of testing, we can't see everything that's in there. We're just trying to get a basic idea of what the balance is. And then we look at opportunistic bacteria, which don't necessarily have to be a problem, but if they are too high in quantity, then they can push out the good guys and you can still have problems. And when I look through that, I think they list about 15 different opportunistic bacteria. If I see more than 3 or even just 1 high, I'll probably want to knock that down a little bit because it's just going to be too much competition with the good guys. And then it looks at about 4 different fungi strains, and then a whole bunch of parasites and parasitic worms. And then on
What?
top
I
of
got
that,
worms
we're
in
looking.
me? What?
Probably not, but I'm sure you have a parasite or two. It's okay. It's all one big happy family unless somebody takes over. But
Speaking of which,
lastly, it looks,
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, just one little bit. That's really
Yeah.
fun. The last part of the test is looking at how well do you actually digest food, fat in particular, pancreatic function, looks for occult blood, any microscopic bleeding of the digestive system, and it gives a really good measurement of inflammation in the gut called calprotectin. And that's actually a very common test that any doctor could do.
Right.
So that's the whole test kit.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So is it the question that I had kind of queued up in my mind was, I've heard of these like that some bacteria in smaller numbers are just fine and they're part of that ecosystem and they're okay, but if they grow out of proportion, then they become pathogenic. Is that true?
In terms of how it makes you feel, it might not be a pathogenic bacteria such as E. coli, but
Right.
if it's high enough, it can still make you feel bad. I wouldn't call it pathological, though. I would call it an overgrowth of an opportunistic bacteria, which is causing all these common symptoms we keep talking about, the gas and the bloat, constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain. So it's always about the balance.
Right. Right. And since we were talking about poop, let's get into colonoscopy and should people do it? When should they do it? What is it? What does it do for us? What can we gain out of it?
Well, that's a tough call. I'm not a gastroenterologist, so I can't really comment too much on that. Most people are supposed to get a colonoscopy when they're 50. Not a
Right.
bad idea. You should at least see what's going on. If you have family history, then you would have done this sooner of any kind of cancer. So it is considered an operation. It's an invasive procedure, but I don't think it's a good idea to never have one. How frequent you need one really depends on what the gastroenterologist finds. Any polyps, anything precancerous. Often people don't need to have another one for another 5 or 10 years, and at a certain age you don't need them at all. I believe probably around 80. Don't quote me on that, but it's not fun. I'm not looking forward to having my first one, but it's something everybody probably should at least have done once and see what's going on. And then you'll have to make that choice for yourself. I don't think I could confidently guide you on that one.
And for those who had the endoscopy and colonoscopy, and it showed that everything is fine, but they still feel unwell. What are your thoughts on that, and why, what can be done after that? So they're doing those diagnostics, right? They're doing
Right.
Both, and then it shows everything is fine, everything's normal, but they still feel, weird.
Right. And of course, those are a lot of the patients I see because they've already been to the gastroenterologist and had those tests done. So on one hand, good. We know that there's nothing bad going on. They've taken a look from the inside out, but you still don't feel well. So that's when we're going to talk about what are you eating? What is your lifestyle? Do you have a lot of stress? Are you getting enough sleep? All that will affect your GI. Beyond that, then we start, getting really deep into what are your symptoms, what's going on with your poop, and we probably want to do a stool test and see if there's anything that we need to kill off, balance off, add to. And often it's really that straightforward of an approach. If you've already done the invasive things, that's what we would be looking at. Usually if somebody comes in with gastrointestinal problems, we'll start at that level and then try to tease back, well, is it just a GI problem or did something set you up for this, like eating a really terrible diet beyond just a food allergy, but just eating at fast food all the time, or maybe you have to travel a lot and you're not able to make really good choices and it's just built up over time, or you're not sleeping very well for lots of different reasons. You're working 80 hours a week. So all that will come back and haunt you in your digestive system, quite frankly. So I try to get people to a point where if we can treat the superficial problem, which is always what a symptom is, by the way, it's your body talking to you, treat that, help you feel better, and then we can dig a little deeper to see what got you there in the first place.
So we hear about all of these different types of food sensitivities nowadays, right? People are allergic to this and that. I can't eat this. I can't eat that. It's getting to such an extreme that I was on a flight somewhere and literally the flight attendant asked no one to open up their peanut, the little peanut bags that they dispense to people, and because someone had severe allergies to peanuts. Why are people so sensitive to foods now? And is this something that you think is just a recent development because of some kind of there's some kind of causality behind that, or has it been always the case, but we just didn't have the data, we didn't have the knowledge, that 100 years ago people were sensitive to foods, or has our stuff just been so compromised, or whatever the other reasons that people are more sensitive to foods?
I think people are getting more sensitive. Not to negate how anybody's feeling, but I feel the same way. I feel like the trend is ramping up, and I think it's because our immune system is working so hard to balance out our polluted environment, because everything we eat, drink, and breathe into our bodies are basically filtering for us. And it takes a while to get that stuff out of our body, and that's unique. Not everybody's going to do it efficiently. So our immune system's always overtaxed. So we're going to have more of an inflamed state, and that can also happen in the digestive system. And that's when we get into the term of leaky gut, which is another very general term. But what it means is the cells of the digestive system are actually inflamed. And when those cells get inflamed, they kind of get kind of poofy. So if you think about them as fitting together, they're called a tight gap junction. If they get inflamed, then they kind of puff up a little bit and pull apart a teeny bit, microscopically, and then particles get across into your bloodstream that don't belong there, and you start to have cross reactions, or you might have a reaction to a food that you never had before. It doesn't mean that necessarily has to be permanent. When people come in to see me for food allergies, if we clean up the digestive system, which is first and foremost, because if you have a disrupted GI, you're going to be more reactive anyway, but clean that up. And then if you have to piggyback on that, looking into individual food allergies, do that, and you literally just avoid those food allergies between 3 and 6 months usually, and then you try to reintroduce them after that period of time. A lot of times people are fine. So it's really giving the body the chance to heal and not react anymore. And stress will also cause inflammation. It will disrupt the immune system. It actually suppresses the immune system. And stress can look like anything from a bad diet to not enough sleep to stressful relationships, whether that's personal or work. So we live in a really stressful world, depending on your location. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I think the only thing I talk about all day long is, how's your stress? Are you getting enough sleep? What is your diet like? Right. And then we have to do all this other fancy stuff to bring things into balance, because we can't change a lot of that. People have to work. They have the lifestyle that they have. Some things hopefully we can mitigate with getting to bed a little bit earlier, or not playing with your phone up until the time you go to bed. So little things like that do matter, but they all build up, suppress the immune system. You become more reactive, and it's just a downward spiral from there.
So how can we counteract some of those things? Are there standard supplements or things beyond just like eating good, wholesome food, quality food from good sources that are not compromised in terms of how the food was processed and produced in the first place? But other than that, anything else that people can supplement with in order to help their systems?
Their digestive system or their
digestive
immune system?
Yeah. I guess let's talk about digestive system and immune system. Why not?
So It's hard to say without individualizing it, but I suppose in general you could, especially if you're traveling, take
Right.
in a nice, easy digestive enzyme with you. It doesn't have to be real fancy. If you know you need some hydrochloric acid, there are combinations out there. So some HCl and some enzymes. If you don't have a gallbladder, or if you know you don't digest fat well, something that has ox bile in it, unless you're a vegan or vegetarian. But there are a lot of supplements that just have all that in one pill. So you can take one or two before each meal. And then taking a good probiotic along with you is often all you need to do to be healthy while you're traveling, or if you just need to try and work out your digestive system on your own. Those are good things to try initially.
For vegetarians, is that vegetarians and vegans, do they have to do anything else and special because they might have like a lower protein intake? And I know it's difficult to get like all of your proteins from just plant-based sources. Is there anything special that they need to do to take care of their gut?
Well, in general, I have found the protein levels a little bit on the lower side, and that can be appropriate for a lot of people. I'm not saying vegetarianism is bad,
Right.
but there are very powerful plant enzymes that could be fine, but they generally have a higher fiber diet, so they have a lot helping them to move things through the body a lot better. So that really provides them the prebiotic for the probiotic creation. So if they are having a harder time digesting those fibrous foods, though, that's where the plant enzymes could come in just to help process that better. And they can use the apple cider vinegar. That would be a great workaround.
Right. And for some of the gut issues that people have, is there any basis to think that some of those are caused by some kind of genetic influences, or just your genes that you're predisposed to certain things with that, and what people can do about that part?
Yeah, there's a gene called FUT2, and it's the gene that determines if you're going to make your own prebiotics to feed your probiotics. And if you have enough of the variants, then that's not going to work very well. That means you're going to have to pay much more attention to how much fiber you're eating so you can give your body the ingredients it needs to create those prebiotics to feed the probiotics. If you have genes that say you're not going to do well with lactose or with gluten, then that can very much determine how your digestive system is going to behave if you eat those foods unwittingly. So genetics really can play a big factor with that.
Is there a test that people can run to find out? Are we so sophisticated right now in technology-wise in terms of detecting that based on some kind of genetic test? Is there anything out there that people can just go out, do a genetic test and get some markers on that, or is that not?
There are. It's usually better to do that with a physician who's been trained in reading the genetic profile. So that's honestly nothing that we learned in school. All this genetic stuff that's going on right now, we didn't learn any of that in school. We're all taking courses outside of that and trying to get our feet. A lot of people have used 23andMe back to what that raw data offers. It's in the raw data, but 23andMe, best to my recollection, doesn't talk about that specific gene. They tease out some bits of that, like celiac and lactose intolerance, and then of course they get into the bigger genes like BRCA and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's if you opt into that. But I haven't used 23andMe in a long time. I really don't recommend them anymore for the medical purposes, simply because they're not as inclusive with the medical data as they used to be. They don't test as much. There's a different laboratory that we use now, or that I use. It's not necessarily the only one. There are some private companies creating their own genetic test, but the company I use is the same kind of technology in terms of it's just a simple spit test, and then you get the raw data, but you won't, as an individual or even me, be able to interpret that data. You kind of have to put it into a computer program, because there are tens of thousands of genes in there that may or may not be important medically that we know of yet, but if you put it into a program that groups this information together and helps explain it a little bit, and then you can pull it together with your knowledge, that's really the best way to go. So as an individual, a regular public person, I think you'd have to do something like 23andMe. But otherwise, if you're seeing a physician who is dealing with genetics, they probably have their own favorite test that they would recommend.
Right. I'm thinking about, and first of all, you're just taking questions out of my mouth over here, addressing them, because I was going to say, with we're learning more about DNA and obviously how complex all the genes are and how they can switch on and off, and we still don't know a lot about how all of that works. So it's still a little bit of a lot of about it is like touch and go, where we're just not sure. So you kind of just addressed that yeah, it's like we probably not know all those things to kind of pinpoint, unless they're like very, very, very specific things that we are fairly certain about. So what are some of the other therapies that are out there that are available to people to regulate their microbiomes to address those issues? What are some of the therapies?
If we don't know individually, medically what's going on, like we haven't done a test, then I would look at prebiotic, probiotic, looking at enzymes, maybe a little hydrochloric acid. There's actually, I'm glad you asked that question, because one of my favorite things, which we learned about in school eons ago, was using a castor oil pack. So, some people may remember castor oil from when they were a kid. Their mom used to make them take that as a laxative, and it tasted horrible.
Right.
That's not done so much anymore. What we were taught to do is you actually put that castor oil on a little bit of flannel or wool, and you apply it to the belly. So from the sternum to the pubic bone, and then over your entire abdomen, you put this oily cloth on your belly, and then wrap it up so you don't get stain anywhere, and then put a heating pad or a hot water bottle on top, and you just let it sit there and soak in. Castor oil is very anti-inflammatory. It's very soothing to the GI, and it's also detoxifying. So you start off with only 15 minutes, maybe a few times a week, and see if you can move that up to 60 minutes every single day. And that just really helps heal and calm things down. So that's one of my favorite external things to do to the body, aside from eating all the right things that you're supposed to eat. And if that's not enough to really help somebody, that's where the testing comes in, to sort out if there's something that we need to kill off, or maybe take a different probiotic, or the candida. It can sometimes be a little bit more dicey. So if you can't get by on just trying to work with the symptoms, testing is really, really useful.
Where can people do that? Is this something that is sort of like self-administered, or you go to a naturopathic practitioner such as yourself to get that that oil and that therapy done?
Oh, that's easy. You can go to Whole Foods. You can probably buy it on the internet. It's just castor oil.
Just castor oil.
And you'll find castor oil kits. It's usually just to me, it's too small. It's this tiny little flannel, whereas I like to have a big one that covers your whole abdomen. But it was designed to fit over the liver. So over the right side of your rib cage where the liver is, and you just put a little bit of oil in there. The secret to it, though, is not to douse the cloth in oil. You kind of do like a little bit of a sine wave on the cloth so it doesn't get too yucky, and then you just put that directly on your skin. So if you get a castor oil kit, a castor oil pack kit, it'll have those instructions in there, but that's generally how it works. Every naturopath is taught how to do this. Highly unlikely that it's taught in regular medical school, but that's an easy one.
So what exactly is happening when you do that, when you're applying that to your skin?
So your skin's going to absorb it. Your skin's very absorptive, and it's going to penetrate all your vital organs, everything in your abdomen. So it's going to help move things along if you're a little constipated. It's going to reduce inflammation. It's going to detoxify, and if you're moving your bowels better, you're going to detoxify better too. And it's very soothing. Some people will also put this on their back where their adrenals are. Your adrenals sit on top of your kidneys, so around mid-back or so, and it's very adrenal tonifying. So it can be very soothing and relaxing, especially if you're a very sensitive person. You've tried working with your adrenals, and whatever you tried, whether it was a vitamin or an herb, it was just too strong. This is a nice, easy, gentle thing to do just to help yourself heal a little bit and get the ball rolling.
So I got two more questions, because you mentioned adrenals, and one thing that I was thinking about is how adrenal system can be kind of overexerted and stressed, and some of it is in parts people are saying like, well, I'm drinking too much coffee and my adrenal system is a little bit overtaxed. Is there any truth to that? Is drinking coffee on a regular basis, 2 cups a day, is that stressing our adrenal system?
Totally depends on the situation. There's lots of research out there showing that coffee is actually an antioxidant. There's some literature saying drinking up to 5 cups a day can be okay. But I have plenty of people who say, I can't touch caffeine because it just makes me too jittery and makes me too stressed out. So we actually are genetically programmed to decaffeinate or to process this caffeine in a certain rate. So if you have too many variants, you're going to hold on to that caffeine and it's going to make you feel more reactive. So if you're in a super stressful situation, just think about drinking coffee and how that's going to make you feel. If it's going to make you feel more stressed, then that's not the right choice for you. If you're having an average day, you're not too stressed out or sick or have a suppressed immune system or stomach trouble, caffeine or coffee, I should say, really upsets a lot of people, then coffee is probably not the right choice for you. Some people will use tea, or even better yet, green tea. So many good things about green tea, and that's caffeinated. So it's a different caffeine. It usually hits people a little bit more gently, but it's still caffeine. So I learned a great little phrase about coffee when I was in school. It's just a sweet little bean that we have unfortunately abused. So it's just an herb. It's a plant. It's there for us to consume if we want it, but we just can't abuse it. So you have to listen to your body. I'm not going to tell somebody to stop drinking coffee if I can clearly see that they need it, they want it, they're addicted. They're never going to come back and see me if I say stop drinking coffee. So you have to work around that and help them find other ways of finding balance in their lives. But coffee does not have to be the bad guy. It's all in how you use it.
Right. I heard that caffeine in coffee plants is basically like a neurotoxin for like insects that try to. Obviously, they're small, so when they ingest that, they can't handle it. So that's kind of like, it was like a self-defense mechanism for the plant. Yet we humans found a different to the demise of coffee, which is trying to protect itself. We were like, yeah, you're awesome, I love you. What are some of the symptoms of indicators of like adrenal overexertion? Something that people can kind of detect in themselves and know like, okay, maybe my adrenal system is overtaxed. What can people look into?
Well, it can be kind of sneaky because at first you don't notice it, and it doesn't happen in one day. It happens over a course of years, and there's a little bit of a curve. And
let me just add on to that. And if you could just explain maybe to those who are not familiar with what adrenal system is all about, what is it, and how does it matter in our bodies?
Your adrenals sit on top of your kidneys. So you have two. They're these tiny little glands, one on top of each kidney. And they respond to stress. And they get the signal from the brain. So we have what a lot of people call the HPA system or axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and then the adrenals. So I have this cute little test where it shows you your brain perceives stress, and then it goes through the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and then down to the adrenals, and it produces cortisol and DHEA, two hormones that are supposed to help us deal with stress. And people come in and they say, well, I don't want any cortisol because I know that's bad. That means I'm too stressed out. Well, no, you need cortisol to survive. You just need it in the right amount. So if your body has been told to produce cortisol and DHEA at a high level for too long a period of time, you start to feel it. And at first you feel kind of wired and tired for no good reason, or you sleep a lot, but you're just not catching up. Sometimes people just feel anxious. And so you have this upward trend, and then eventually you crash. And that's usually when people come in to see me because they realize I'm just too pooped out. I have no energy. I can barely get out of bed, and it's affecting my life. And so if we were to do a test, you would see that actual pattern. We're supposed to have most of our cortisol in the morning around 8 a.m. This is the one that wakes us up and get us going for the day. And then it starts to decline around noon, and then it tapers off until around midnight, or whenever it's low enough for you to fall asleep. And so it's really fascinating to do these tests because you can see precisely what's happening in a day of a life of a real human being in their real day. and you can see if it's too high or too low somewhere, and then that's how you can tweak the therapies to either lower that cortisol if it is too high, but often it comes back too low. And that's what surprises people. And they feel like, well, my cortisol is low, so I should be good. Well, no, that's why you're tired. You need to have your cortisol in the right amount to give you the energy. And so there are lots of adaptogenic herbs for that. There's DHEA, all kinds of things, but that's just the starting point. Again, we have to go back to, well, what got you there in the first place?
Right.
Sleep and diet and lifestyle. I mean, the things I keep repeating.
Everything,
I feel like
everything
an old
is
record,
connected.
but it's true.
No, but it's so true. Everything is connected. Everything is it's a system of systems. Everything is kind of touching everything else, and that affects in a sort of chain reaction. All those systems together. So I totally see that. So it's worth repeating because people tend to have these tendencies to think about, oh, it's one thing. It's this or that, or I have too much of this or not enough of that. But there's just way more to that than just those simple elements. It's the stress. It's the the lifestyle that you have. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you how are you? What kind of food are you eating? All of those things that absolutely totally matter. So very, very interesting.
Yeah, and we've made it more complicated. Every decade that goes by, we get more and more technology, and I think it's starting to interfere with us. And we know by looking at our phone, playing on our computers before we go to bed, that's just overstimulation for our brain, too much exposure to electromagnetic frequency. If we live in a city, the lights are really bright. Are you using blackout curtains? Is your neighbor too loud? I mean, we're supposed to have pitch black when we sleep and no sound in a nice, cool room. So people debate the perfect temperature, but around the upper 60s is often the best temperature. And a lot of people like it warm, and you're not getting a good enough sleep actually when you sleep that warm.
That is so true. That is so true. It may feel nice and comfy when you go to sleep and it's nice and warm, but if it's too hot, you will not get a good night's sleep. And so I made sure that our thermostats are adjusted and they reset and they go down to like 65 and it just you definitely get a better sleep. I'm just speaking from my own experience in that. So it's good that you mentioned that because, people there's just so many different things that are affecting us that people sometimes just forget. They're like, oh, it's comfortable, then it must be good. And so, but it still impacts you.
You get used to something and it's normal for you. So you just don't realize.
Right.
And something else to consider, which maybe is on your agenda as well, but your adrenal glands will affect your thyroid, which is a really big issue. A lot of people have Hashimoto's thyroiditis or just plain hypothyroidism, and we don't clearly understand why. It's just so common. Almost everybody comes in, it seems like, on some sort of thyroid medication, and that's a tough one to unwind because we often don't know the cause, but I feel like our adrenals are really a big part of that. There is a balancing act that your adrenals and your thyroid have together. So if your adrenals are overworked, you're going to feel it in your thyroid at some point. So proper adrenal support is key for any hypothyroidism.
Right.
And then there are a lot of different therapies around hypothyroidism, whether it's medical or naturopathic, that we can get into if you like. But I just don't want to forget to mention that connection of the adrenals and the thyroid.
Right, and so people hear about that, thyroid issues, and but they might not understand what exactly thyroid does for us. It's one of the glands that secretes things into our system. But what exactly does it do for us? And I know I think in the first podcast you mentioned that you had some issues with thyroid. Am I remembering that correct, or? I'm
not sure that was me. I know we talked about it, but I'm not sure that was me necessarily. We did talk about how
I just gave you a disease now.
If you're thinking of, some people do better with synthetic, some people do better with natural. It's a big old mix.
So tell me about thyroid. What kind of function does it play in our body, and why why so many people are having issues with thyroid nowadays?
So the thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland that sits right on your neck right here. And when you have hypothyroid or underactive thyroid, you'll experience things such as foggy headedness, bad focus and concentration, dry hair, dry skin, dry eyes, hair falling out, including eyebrows. A classic sign is losing the last lateral third of your eyebrows. Your eyelashes can fall out. You become constipated. You're very lethargic for no good reason. You're gaining weight for no good reason. And you just feel blah all the time, depression. So everything slows down.
Right. And why is it that more and more people are having issues with thyroid nowadays? Is it are we going back to like pretty much everything that we talked about, stress, food, and
I think so. I mean, we can throw heavy metals into that. Mercury
metals.
has an association with causing low thyroid. Granted, that's not true of everybody, and I do a lot of heavy metal testing, but it's something to consider, and it can be worthwhile for some people. Lack of iodine is a big one. We really just don't get enough iodine in our food, and the iodized salts are not the right kind of iodine for us. So using the unprocessed sea salt is great, but actually it doesn't have a lot of iodine in it. So using a supplement can be useful, but I would not suggest doing that unless you're working with a physician. There
Right.
are some very strong ones out there, which can be very appropriate for some people, but not for everybody. So lack of iodine is a big part of it, but that crosses more into a medical situation where you want to work with somebody on that one.
Right, right. In terms of other therapies, so we talked about some of the things that you can take in as supplements, some external things that you can do with the castor oil for your GI tract. What other therapies are out there that can help out with that? What about acupuncture? Is that just kind of some kind of a voodoo thing? What's happening with acupuncture that helps our bodies?
Well, I'm not an acupuncturist, so I can't speak very eloquently about that, but I believe in acupuncture. I have seen it help so many people. It balances the body. If I have somebody coming in and, I do a lot of biochemistry, so I work on the physical body. If somebody isn't responding in the way that I feel like they should have, there's something getting in their way, I might ask them to see an acupuncturist because it might be on the energetic level that something needs to shift, and that just might match that person better. So I think acupuncture is a wonderful thing. I mean, it's been around for something like 3,500 years. If something
Right.
lasts that long, it can't be wrong. And, it's been fairly well documented in the medical research now for pain, if nothing else. So it can be fantastic.
Right. What about some visceral, manipulation therapies?
Sure. I don't know a lot about that. I don't do physical work, but I do have some colleagues who do that and patients who have responded well to that. Especially if you have had some abdominal surgeries or, accidents, things that kind of cause some scar tissue to grow in the abdominal area. I think doing a visceral manipulation or scar therapy or acupuncture, something that really targets that level, can be very useful.
So one of our guests and was Lisa Klein, and we have to release her her podcast, and she's going to probably kill me soon because I haven't done it yet. And we had a fascinating conversation about that, and it was about IMT and what she does, and a lot of work with visceral manipulation. So that was a very interesting conversation, and I'll be working on getting that out soon because it was definitely eye-opening and a whole different approach that I was totally not aware of about the fascia and how all of that fits into your body. So, Lisa, if you're watching this, my sincere apologies that your podcast is not out yet, and Karen's already has been published. So I'm just gonna not show up in DC ever, but we will do it soon. And what else is hot in naturopathic medicine? To swiftly segue to that question.
Wow. Well, the genetics are pretty hot right now. Methylation. It really kind of depends on what niche you have. Your practice is often formed by the people who come to see you or your working environment. I work in a practice that has a medical doctor who's also an acupuncturist. We have a psychologist, we have a nutritionist, as well as a physical therapist, massage therapist. So we have a large variety of people coming in to see us, but often they come see the medical doctor first. And
Right.
so he's an internist, and so he's going to get a lot of general things, and that's what we're going to see. We're going to see all the anxiety and stress and GI and thyroid issues. We're not going to have so much heart disease or cancer. That's just something that we don't specialize in. So
Right.
in my world, it's a lot about the genetics and methylation and all the stuff we've been talking about, as well as environmental medicine. I've been studying that for a couple years now. It's a gigantic topic, and it's only getting harder because our environment's so polluted. So I'm working on becoming a little bit more proficient in that.
Right.
But that's got to be huge. I feel like we have so many illnesses that we don't have a name for or a cause for. What else could it be but something going on in our environment?
Right. So today's topics were mainly surrounding the digestive tract and that system that impacts pretty much everything else in your body. What are we going to talk about next in our next episode? There's just still so much to cover.
Oh my goodness. Well, we'll have to think about that. We've talked about a lot of things in general.
Right.
Let's see.
Yeah, in our first episode, we kind of talked about naturopathic medicine in general, how it complements and works with your standard medicine, and then we kind of, I was kind of asking you a bunch of different questions about different types, elements of what naturopathic medicine is doing and how you're treating. Now we kind of focused on the digestive tract and how that is working on the body's overall systems. What else do you guys deal with that we can kind of talk about in our next podcast?
Well, I think diving a little bit deeper into some general genetic things, there's sort of a top 7 genetic profile that we like to look at that really can determine, how somebody feels with their mood, how well they're methylating, which is this biochemical process that every single cell in your body has to go through that affects a lot of things from mood to energy to detoxification, the creation of glutathione, which is our most powerful antioxidant. So genetics could be a really large topic in and of itself. And I can send you some details on that and we can sort that out. We can dive in a little bit deeper into some of the environmental medicine I've been learning about that I'd like to share with you. I think that would be a great one too. Fantastic.
Well, I think this is where we can kind of place a bookmark and entice our audience to tune in next time. And we're going to be talking about genetics and how what's hot in that domain and what can you do to kind of maybe diagnose some of the issues and learn a little bit more about what's being developed in that field. Karen, thank you so much for doing this again, and I'm looking forward to our next podcast and talking about that topic and anything else that comes up.
Great! Thank you so much for having me.
Any final thoughts or things that you takeaways that you want to share with the audience?
Get enough sleep. It's all about sleep. Yeah, sleep and water. Rest, be good to yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. That's really the basis for a happy life, I think.
Yeah, and know that there are people like you out there who are looking at broader aspects of health and are exploring various other therapies and approaches to healing. And so, on that note, thank you so much for being on the show. And until next time. Listen, learn, and share the information with others. So if you found this podcast informational and you found something for you or something that explained what's happening in your body, share it with someone else and spread the message so people can sort of be at least aware and exposed to this information and, pull on that thread and learn a little bit more. Maybe it's going to help somebody's condition and improve their health. Thank you very much. The world is full of interesting people with wisdom and extraordinary experiences to learn from. Join me on a journey to discover them, speak with them, and learn from them. I'm Adrian Sinclair, host of A Podcast with Interesting People at apodcast.com.